planning and policy, the educational doctoral program, educational planning and social development, the School of Education, Faculty of Humanities and Education. He's also the co-founder and chief consultant, the Caribbean Leadership Reimagine Initiative, CLRI. In terms of achievements, there are many achievements and awards. The Principal's Award in 2023 made to CCEP for research activity generating the most funds. Road Project Director in 2023, Principal's Award made to CCEP for research and activity with the most development impact. Rural Policy Director, and I'm descending, going back, 2022, Bronze Place winner in the 2022 Independent Publisher Book Award for the book Education and Development Policy Imperatives for Jamaica and the Caribbean. And in 2021, finalist in the Vice Chancellor's Award for Excellence for all-round excellent performance in outstanding teaching, outstanding research accomplishments, outstanding service to the university community, and outstanding public service. And then also in 2021, the Principal's Award Most Outstanding Researcher. 2020 Principal Award Most Outstanding Researcher. And again, in 2020, the Principal's Award Best Publication for the book Reimagine Educational Leadership in the Caribbean. And 2019, the Principal Award Best Publication for the article Leadership Behavior That Nurture Organizational Trust. Re-examine the fundamentals, and it's in the Journal of Human Resources and Management. And so when we sum it all up, we realize that Professor Thompson wears many hats. And you can think of them in various ways. He is professor, he's project director, coordinator, co-founder. He also has many achievements to which he's esteemed as either most esteemed or most outstanding or the best. And so that is very good. He is a prominent, what I call a literati, having published a number of books and articles, and the list goes on and on. And so he comes to us as a person who is well recommended, and we would have tasted some of what he had to offer this morning as he interrogated the topic, the theme, the church in its engagement with the world in crisis, strategies, and duties. And so without any further ado, I'm going to invite the eminent Professor Thompson, to share with us at this time. Let us hear it from Professor Thompson.
Thank you, Dr. Josiah. Greetings once again, colleagues, friends. I'm again happy to be sharing this full day with you. It has been a meaningful experience, reflecting, reliving, and re-engaging. I had a good lunch with Dr. Mulrain, Dr. Thomas, and I love the name, my apologies. Max Reed. The lunch was good. I was saying to the guys that, well, I didn't mention that I'm a cook, and I'm very critical of other people's cooking. But that chicken was prepared very well. So tell the cook that she's never jump. It's good to see my Moravian friends. I mean, good to see all our friends, but good to see Brother Jermaine and Brother Barry, Sister Charlie was here earlier. Good to have recognized the underworld student was here. That I have met and spoke with our Baptist friends. They're not Baptists here, right? I think Methodists and so. So one of the things that struck me as I reflected and was saying to Dr. Messiah, UTC is really a small place nowadays. I mean, it's still about a little bad, you know. And I'm going to talk more about that in the course of this conversation. So this morning, for those of us who may not have been here, I sought to identify 3 crises, a global one, a regional one, and a national one, and to make a case, attempt to make a case for how the church could be engaging with those realities consistent with its call to be a community of advocates and change makers. This evening I want to discuss with us some core elements of leadership which I'm proposing, positing, or to inform that engagement. In this morning's conversation, we took note of the model in the book of Daniel and in the life of Daniel himself, and how he determined that notwithstanding the power that the king possessed and the consequences that could flow in his direction, were he not to comply with the wishes and expectations of the king, he would nonetheless speak the truth boldly, fearlessly, and to the best of his interpretation of the situation, responsibly. And after he had told the king straight to his face, he was willing to continue serving the king. That's a profound way of behaving. And notice the word I'm using, behaving. That's a profound way of behaving. That's a profound way of engaging. For telling the other hard truths is not mutually exclusive to working with the other. We can share radically different perspectives on issues, but still work together. So I want to talk this evening about reimaginative leadership. And here's how I'm taking liberty with your theme, Dr. Thomas, UTC colleagues. The church in its engagement with a world in crisis, reimaginative leadership strategies and duties. Reimaginative leadership strategies and duties. So I've inserted those 2 words in attempting to create a pathway to the direction in which I want to go this evening. I want to begin by making the observation that disclosure that this notion, this construct of reimaginative leadership is an area in which I've been doing much of my research work. It's a theory, it's a framework that I have sought to create to argue, to explain my interpretation of leadership. But I'm quick to say that theories and frameworks and models that we create or to which we are attracted, they don't just jump upon us and hug us up. They don't grow on us when we're sleeping. They don't come out of anywhere. They don't come out of the blue. Rather, they are born out of our backgrounds, our journeys, our realities. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to my interest in leadership, and more specifically, my nuancing of leadership as a reimaginative engagement. So I was saying to Sister Charmaine in the break that, by the way, in the Morgan Church, everybody's brother and sister. we remember to say Reverend, but it's Reverend Dave I'm talking about. Reverend Charmaine Dave, that's it. So I was sharing with her that in the church order of the Morgan Church, the 1957 version, it makes an explicit statement that a minister owes a duty of obedience, a duty of obedience to the PEC, the Provincial Elders Conference. And in our church, telling the PEC no or asking the PEC if there's another way is almost anathema. But it's not unique to the Moravian Church. I was also sharing that the famous author, Catholic professor, Hans Cole, he was kicked out of the Vatican as an advisor because he came to the view that the Pope is not infallible. He was removed from his post as a professor at the university. And some years later, the University of Notre Dame invited him to do a lecture. And they were reprimanded. This man doesn't have the authority to speak on any matter in the Catholic Church because he says the Pope is not infallible. So I'm saying that to say that in my journey in the church, I contended with a leadership philosophy that says your duty is to obey. And part of that understanding, which was being carried forward by my generation or by the generation of leaders under whom I served, part of that understanding is located in the view that there is only one right way. And that is the way that the leadership says it should be done. But this notion of one right way was not unique to the church. Those of you who have studied management would remember that one of the, might I say, the doctrines that Frederick Taylor gave to the world in the area of management from as far back as 1920 was that there's only one right way to lead, one right way to manage. And the duty of management was to ensure that people follow that one right way. So growing up in that context of there being only one right way, I struggled with how I could find a pathway to arguing that there are many right ways. There are other approaches. It is in that context of a struggle to create an accepting perspective that I happened upon this notion of, initially, leadership reimagination. And so my first piece of work in this area was in 2013 in a book entitled Leadership Reimagination, a primer of principles and practices. I am indebted to our collective colleague and inspiring author, Walter Brueggemann, whom many of you know, either personally or through his over 100 books, who in his 1978 classic, The Prophetic Imagination, sought to articulate this concept called imagination It is from him, it is from that place that I developed the notion of reimagination in 2013. And later, as we are to now, I have evolved to the place I'm talking about reimaginative leadership. Brueggemann, in this book, which has been published, there are at least maybe 4 versions. The latest one, the 40th anniversary edition in 2018. In that book, Brueggemann discusses the prophet Moses, the first prophet, as we were taught in my days. They call that course Portions B, or remember Portions B? I don't know why I call Portions B now, but Portions B was a prophets and Luke Acts, and Reverend William Water taught that course. No. William Water taught Portions 8, sorry. Burchell Taylor taught Portions 8. Yeah. Moses is presented as this instrument and this messenger of imagination in his audacity in saying to Pharaoh that God has declared a new future, that God has determined that there is an alternative for the oppression under which Pharaoh had his feet. Allow your minds to go with it and think of how cast in the mold, how surrendered, how submitted the people of Israel were under Pharaoh's rule. They couldn't think of any other way, any other lifestyle, any other possibility but oppression. This is what it's going to be. And Moses was sent to tell Pharaoh that he is to set my people free. A new possibility dawned. So imagination, according to Brueggemann, imagination is the craft of conceiving of an alternative to the dominant narrative. That what you hear around you as a submitting set, and that there's no other way. Imagination says there is in fact another way, and there are other ways. So that is where I got that first inspiration to talk about reimagination, and to now move as I have to this new designation, reimaginative leadership. Without hopefully sounding too tendentious, Mr. Chair, I want to tell you that the word reimaginative is not in the dictionary. It's yet. So, I am, in time to come, I'm sure it will be there. All right? But what is reimaginative leadership? And how does it differ from leadership reimagination? In my thinking, in my argument, reimaginative leadership is differentiated from leadership reimagination, as reimagination is a noun. It's like a thing, that thing. Reimagination. It's a verb, it's a noun. Reimaginative, as I've constructed it, is an adjective. It describes. But beyond being an adjective, which describes, the question is, what does it describe? And I'm positing that it describes our behavior. Remember I used that word behavior earlier? It describes our behavior. So here's what I want us to know about leadership as I head on to make the point I want to make. Leadership is not a position. Leadership is not a an ascription of some reward. Leadership is not a gift, save and except where it expresses itself in a particular kind of behavior. So my argument is that leadership is a behavior. It's not a position. It's a behavior. And the question then becomes, how reimaginative is your leadership? So then the suggestion that leadership is a behavior and not a position, I suspect that that could be, and I would like it to be, controversial. And because it's potentially subversive. Because we now want to talk about people in leadership positions, and that we must have respect for people in leadership positions, as though people in leadership positions are automatically entitled to respect because of the leadership position. And my critique of that is that all of us are entitled to respect. But what determines your respect is your behavior, not your position. And that was an area of struggle. I want to share this with you provocatively again, that one of the, those of you who follow history and track pre-modern, modern and postmodern times, or study how society was, and I'm sure Dr. Desai as a philosopher would have paid attention to that. In pre-modern times, the explanation for phenomena came from those in authority. And people were taught to accept things on the basis of faith. So when the Pope or the King, well, the King didn't much explaining, he did edicts. His councilmen would give the explanation. When the Pope or the King or the Bishop issues a statement, and it's not very Jamaican to recognize, to know that when the Pope spoke, he issued a bull, it's a paper bull. And you could put a four-letter word after that, would start ends with a T, and say something the Pope said was paper bull that. But what I want to say is that we were taught to accept things on faith, right? Accept things on faith. Because they were coming from a person in a position of authority. But if you, so when you shift from that to say now leadership is not a position of authority, leadership is a behavior, it then opens the place for a postmodern view that anybody can be a leader. And if leadership is a position of privilege, then this is now sacrilege because everybody is a leader. And how can we allow that? And this is one of the realities of AI, and before AI, the social media, where a little youth in a little ghetto community, Akeem from around at what I come to name around this, just down off Hadley Park Road, man. But that youth who was teaching youngsters, Max, the young man is 13 now, and he was reshaping the way the community was behaving at age 13, simply because there's a thing called social media. He could get his message out. And consistent with how politics runs. And we said this morning, politics is not about friendship. Politics is about convenience alliances. He easily got an interview with the Prime Minister. Prime Minister invited him to Jamaica House because there was now probably the prospect of some vote to get from that. So Akeem becomes a leader despite not being in a position of power, having the potential to influence things in the community to the point where the most powerful office in the land invites him for a sit down. Process that for a minute. All right? So to suggest then that leadership is a behavior and not a position recast the game in terms of who leads. And then, if you buy my argument that the benchmark is how reimaginative that leader is, and we come to ask what are the ingredients of reimaginative leadership. In my upcoming book, which should be out before the fall, before the new academic year, I discuss 9 qualities, 9 ingredients, 9 characteristics of reimaginative leadership. And I'm going to discuss 3 with you tonight. I'm going to, all right? But to understand the relevance of those 3 qualities, I want to ask us to ponder what is the nature of the crisis that is facing the church, which ought to be a public body. Not public body in the legal sense of public body that is governed by some law, but a public place, a public space. I suggest that there are 3 crises facing the church in the Caribbean, probably outside the Caribbean as well. And I'm describing these as a crisis of reach, a crisis of relevance, and a crisis of revenues. To deal with these crises, there are three qualities of reimaginative leadership that I suggest are applicable. The first is what I call in the book, again drawing from the wisdom of Brueggemann, I call it alternatives thinking. It's a hyphenated word. It's not alternative thinking, but alternatives hyphen thinking. Remember I said that Brueggemann defined imagination as the audacity of Moses to say to Pharaoh that your vision of the world is not final. Your determination as to what is going to be is not going to stand forever. God is going to do a new thing, which was what Isaiah declared. What's alternative thinking? Alternative thinking refers to a default mindset, a default setting in the reprogrammed brain of the radical pastor, of the radical student, of the radical activist. It's a default setting which rejects the notion that there is only one good way. There's only one good practice. There's only one good policy. There's only one good approach or strategy, and that there is no other way. If you believe I'm inventing fiction, I want to suggest to you that so that the doctrine, this understanding that there is no other way, became, and in some places remains, the economic doctrine of Western societies. If you Google the word T-I-N-A, Tina, not Tina Turner, Tina, you come upon several articles criticizing the belief in Britain and in Western Europe that there is no alternative. That's what Tina is. There is no alternative to the neoliberal economic philosophy that there is only one way of stimulating growth in an economy. The IMF, the World Bank, and these Western financial institutions believe it as a doctrine. that the only way to stimulate growth, lowering the taxes on large corporations, cutting back on social services, and requiring people to pay their way. That's how you build a healthy economy. Tina. This is, it's the heart of what those of us who are old enough to remember. It's heart of what is called Thatcherism and Reaganomics. Some of you may remember a lady called Liz Truss. Anybody remember who that person is? The shortest serving prime minister in British history. Or was it the second shortest? But shortest actually, shortest, she's the shortest. I think she was prime minister for 7 weeks. Liz Truss came to office in 2022 in about, was it July, and left by the end of August. Britain was on the brink of collapse. And her philosophy as a Tina apostle was that you have to restore the economy by cutting social services and giving big tax cuts to the rich. She did just that, and the British economy tanked. But Tina is not only an economic philosophy, Tina is a church, or put that another, Tina is evident in how the church operates. And this morning you recall me wondering aloud about the disposition of some to hold the view that there's a particular line that the church must walk. There's a particular role that the pastor plays. So if you listen to some who believe this doctrine says that the church should preach the gospel, visit the sick, tend to the needy, and keep itself quiet after that. It is not the church's business to get involved in politics or in other kind of social activities beyond meeting the needs of people. That's a Tina mentality. And persons who go off the reservation, go off the rail, and begin to be critical are viewed as deviating. I'm going to make the last self-criticism as a Moravian. In the Moravian church, if you run for politics as a minister, you're out. You cannot seek public office. You cannot run for councillor or MP. You're cut out. You have to choose. So there is this dualism, this binary thinking, which was it's just part of ancient, might I say, church polity, that there is only one way to be a pastor. There's only one way to be a particular kind of leader. And so I ask people, how does a church stay out of politics and limit itself to preaching the gospel when the gospel ought to be responding to providing clarity for and creating a new understanding of politics, which defines our experience. Those of you who do Greek or philosophy will remember that politics simply means the business of the city. It's about our life as a community. So I suggest then that one of the first ways for us to begin to address the issues of reach, relevance, and consequently and later revenues is by thinking of alternative ways of doing ministry. You all know that many churches in Britain have closed down, literally closed down. There's nobody who lives there anymore. These are now relics, these are now museums, these are now used as some places supermarkets or other, closed down. the church is becoming, from a revenue perspective, a highly unviable operation. And the notion that a minister is a person who must be dutifully assigned to a congregation or set of congregations and must limit himself or herself to the needs and needs of the congregation, that model is failing. I know you don't stone people, so you won't stone me for saying that. But the idea that a pastor is assigned to a church here with 30 people, over there with another 45, and down there has a big congregation with 100, half of whom are people struggling to meet their needs. The notion that those people's contributions should pay salaries is an old concept. And I'm saying to us, it's time to think of alternatives. I spoke about the fact that we are so few. This is UTC. Back in my day, this would be the size of a class. Some DNOMs don't have students. Some have a few of what they had before. Some have one. I was saying to my goodly sister, so how do you have DNOM class? And are you one? That's the reality. What is the alternative to that? We could have a detailed conversation about what some of the alternatives are, but I'm saying to us that UTC in its current design, the church in its current design and reality, has become dysfunctional and unable to deliver on its mandate. And so there's need for alternatives thinking. Alternatives thinking. How about then the long abandoned model and practice of churches joining forces? Why do you need in the same town a Baptist, a Moravian, a Methodist, and an Anglican church? Why? And if you believe I've said to the when I worked in the Ministry of Education and even now in the university, the idea that you have UE and UTech right across from each other is an unsustainable model. Same to the churches. So I believe that if there is an approach which seeks to build collaboration and make competition anathema, the church might be able to survive in this difficult time. So you're at UTC as a pastor in training and may be assigned to any denomination which needs a pastor. The United Church is that. The Presbyterian, the Congregational, and the Disciples of Christ. They saw the light. There was a time when it was said that part of the reason we have KSAMC, in the old days KCC, is that St. Andrew was bush. And they couldn't quite have St. Andrew being a municipality. So you merged it with this densely populated city called parish called Kingston. Now St. Andrew is where everybody is. Hanover is how big? So the same model of what I call fusion or collaboration that we are seeing in politics. After 2008, let me make a point. Many universities hit by the economic recession began to collaborate. So this university is now a faculty, serves as a faculty of a large university, because that university couldn't stand by its own. The church, and I know a couple of church leaders are here, may want to consider that. Alternative thinking. I want to move quickly to talk about a second ingredient in reimaginative leadership. Perhaps the most critical of the three I'll discuss. And it's the ingredient called courage. I want to say as a bridge that to offer alternatives, to conceive of alternatives, to suggest potentially offensive alternatives is itself an act of courage to start with. But let me tell you my definition of courage. Courage is the capacity and willingness to conceive of and articulate perspectives which stand in contrast to the dominant perspective or preferred course of action. Courage involves the willingness to hold firmly to that conception and to pursue that course of action regardless of the cost. Undertaking the task of engagement in public discourse, a matter we discussed this morning, advancing alternative ways of seeing reality, as I have said a moment ago, involves courage. But I hasten to add that courage, contrary to what many think, is a kind of blind, fearless movement towards one's objective. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is not a state of mind where nothing bothers you, distresses you, or causes you some measure of uncertainty and trepidation. Courage is the will to say and do, to speak clearly and authoritatively, despite feeling some amount of trepidation, despite feeling some amount of anxiety, despite being conscious of some potential adverse consequence. So if we retake our place this morning in the narrative of Daniel, I would suggest that it's not that Daniel was some fearless creature moving forward without any feeling of dis-ease. Rather, it was a young man proceeding to do what he recognized he had to do in spite of the things that would come, in spite of the consequences that would come to him. The church, as it faces the crises, the larger crises of being distant from the realities of people. And this question of reach has to do with the extent to which the church is speaking the language of the population. You know, nobody goes a third time, certainly not, to a shop that doesn't sell the thing you want to buy or the brand you prefer. If your message from the pulpit is not resonating with people, they ain't gonna come back. If your presence if you're absent from the places where they're trying to make sense of their struggles, if you're absent, they ain't gonna listen to you the next time you speak. And courage is that capacity to speak to the issues that are bothering people, and requires the discernment to read what people are seeking to understand. It requires the insight to articulate what people are unable to express or unwilling to express. And it requires the discipline and persistence in making that message, even when it may be causing you and causing others discomfort. Which is another component of this quality called courage. The act of courage is not welcomed by many people. Your being courageous in what you say is not something that people are going to hug up the moment you say it. You're going to get pushback. And the forcefulness of the pushback is often a reflection of how strong is your impact. So don't let the pushback deter you. But it is critical that in your messaging, you are speaking to the issues that people are seeking to understand. So if I were to leave a word on this question of courage, I would simply say this: a church which speaks courageously to the issues affecting society will have a better chance of reaching people and will be perceived as relevant. In the realm of politics, the last general election in 2020 had a 37% turnout. This local government, that's in Jamaica. In the last local government election, there was a 29.x called a 30% turnout. I can't recall the stats across the other Caribbean in the recent elections. But what I want to say to you is that across the Caribbean, there's a massive deficit of trust. People do not trust politicians. They don't trust police. It will be interesting to do a poll on how many people trust the parson and trust the church. And if people aren't trusting us, they ain't gonna listen to us. So if there's a second word on this question of courage that I would leave, is that we have to have the courage to begin to examine ourselves and look at the trust deficit between ourselves and the society. Some of you know that I spend a lot of time on social media. Yes? I'll do 20, 25 tweets a day because there are issues that I treasure. One of my critics, and there are many of them, when I announced that I'll be here today, he said, the church lost credibility. Now listen, because the church have no credibility. That's a kind of strong statement and an important statement to hear. The most healthy thing that a person in leadership can discover is the assessment that people have of who you are and how you are. Tough reality therapy, but necessary. Let's have the courage to examine ourselves. The final piece I want to discuss in the declining time is the third quality, is what I call mutual accountability. So if you join us real quickly, it's alternative thinking, courage, and thirdly, mutual accountability. Let's go back to where I began and my journey with the leadership of the church in which I grew up. One of the reasons, or one of the dynamics, might I say, that pervaded the church's, might I say, polity was the idea that you are accountable, not me. So go back to that section of the church's law book I quoted. The pastor owes a duty of obedience. One-way street. You obey.
The church today has that view, that the church preach the gospel and people must respond and come to the altar. How many pastors ever go to the altar after they preach their own sermon? Let's face it. Many times the sermons we preach speak to us as well. And we should surrender to the word of God. If we accept it's the word of God, we should go kneel at the altar too. But more broadly, what I want to say is that this business of mutual accountability, or this concept, is rooted in the principle which promotes equity and which says that the leader is answerable to the follower as much as the follower is answerable to the leader. There's a word for it in Buddhism, or in Buddhist teaching. The word is called ajiva. I'm sure Dr. Mulrain and Dr. Josiah are familiar with Buddhist teaching. Ajiva. Ajiva means that a leader submits to being held accountable in the same way he or she seeks to hold others accountable. And thus, logically, he himself holds, or she himself holds self accountable. There's a simple way in which we express it in some of our language. No one lives to himself and no one dies to himself. The only person who's not accountable is God. What does accountability then mean in the context of a new future for the church? It means that as we seek to hold the society accountable, we must begin to open up our operations as a church to the society's questions. There's a mindset that says if you're not a member, you don't have a talk, right? In our churches, we receive donations and gifts from everybody who come to worship. Not true. When we're collecting the offering, we do not say if you're not a member, you're invited not to give. Do we say that? But when we move to have our business meeting, if you're not a member, you can't stay. So this guy just give you money. He just threw in the offering plate. And he can't ask a question about what the church is doing. That takes us back to this little thing I mentioned earlier about alternative thinking. If you receive money from the public, you have a duty to give the public a voice in how you spend the money. We say, of course, in relation to communion, that if you're in good standing with the Lord, if you're not a member and you're in good standing with your church, you may take communion. Who is really in good standing? The United Church had, I don't know if you still have a line in your communion, come, not because you're righteous, but because you're unrighteous. Your presence at the table is not based upon your status, but on the mercies of God. The Moravian have a similar line. We do not presume to come to this thy table, O Lord, trusting in our own righteousness. So if it's so, then how do you decide that some people must be in good standing in order to take communion? And I want to suggest that this separation that we make among who may take is one of the reasons people no longer partake. They leave and they don't return because they feel that there's no place for them. I suggest that the reach of the church is being compromised by the message we preach. I suggest that the membership of the church is declining because of the lack of relevance in our teaching. And I suggest that one cure for the revenue realities we are facing is opening up ourselves to greater scrutiny, welcoming people regardless of their complexity, and growing our body not through some exclusivity which defines some as good or righteous and others as not, but one in which there is a great proclamation, come as you are to worship. Thank you.
Brothers and sisters, we have just listened to a very passionate lecture, very engaging in terms of engaging of thoughts. The time has, we want to thank Professor Thompson for that very inspiring lecture. But we also want to continue the conversation as part of our engagement. He has identified 3 crises with respect to reach, relevance, and revenues. He's also introduced us to a new concept, reimaginative thinking, and has provided ingredients for such as alternative thinking, courage, as well as mutual accountability. And so we have quite a bit on the plate for us to engage at this time. And so the floor is open to any questions you may have. Okay, any question? Yes, I'm Sister Shirley Kabi with a question.
Right, I've heard the opposite view expressed. Thank you. That those churches that are growing in Jamaica are the ones which have strict rules for their members, and that our churches are declining because we have become lax. I've heard that view expressed with regard to Jamaican churches. How do you speak to that?
Yeah, that is in fact an interesting point of view. I would say that there are instances of churches having that level of experiencing growth despite having strict standards for the members. But I want to suggest that whilst a closer study of that phenomenon may be required, I would suggest that among the explanations for this is the fact that the mode of worship, but more importantly, the opportunities for ministry are more widespread, more diverse. If you take any one of, well, perhaps a handful, you'll find that those who lead in one area or the other, whether it is music ministry, whether it is attention to visitors, in the gender caucuses, the women's groups, the leadership responsibility is spread, is diverse. And so people have a sense of place. People have a sense of a stake and of ownership. And I want to suggest that even among our traditional denominations, those that are holding up well in terms of steady membership, stable membership and growth are those who have that model. At the risk of not being able to identify all of them, I'll mention Bethel Baptist Church as a model of diverse and inclusive ministry, which has a very broad outreach platform in terms of the services it provides to the community and its members, and where the
the team of those who preach is wide. If I were to make a criticism is of Bethel, it would be of the same criticism I've been making, that Bethel is not using its vast strength of its membership to challenge some of the structures of oppression and ill in the society. But in terms of a model of ministry that's inclusive, Bethel is a good example. And it has been experiencing growth for a substantial amount of time. I can't tell the exact numbers, but growth at that church is particularly strong. But to the substance of your question, whether your question is whether what I would call a restrictive environment where the laws and rules are issued and people are required to comply, whether that model provides a greater opportunity for growth, I would say probably not. We need to look at the other components of the church's activities which might be attractive to the people who go there.
Yes.
That wasn't my question really. I really wasn't agreeing that the strict rules are what attract people. I was merely reflecting that it is often said.
Okay.
And I accept your response that clearly those churches must be offering something more than strict rules. So often perception is not reality.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a hand back there, Reverend Young. There's one online, I understand, as well.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your presentation, Professor. I just have a question. During the break, I was able to contemplate some things, and earlier you spoke about the church's need for advocacy. And when you spoke about the crisis of the church, and you touched on revenue, I thought you'd have gone another way as opposed to just the givings in the local congregation. And as I sat, I tried to make a connection between the two and wonder if part of the reason why our advocacy as a church is not as strong as it ought to be is because of sometimes where our revenues come from. So the politicians, the member of parliament, the councillors, the prime minister, whoever, they're in our congregations, and so we don't want to offend them. We don't want to offend those who are business owners who have, unfair business practices, especially when it comes to their employees, because what they give is so substantial to the church. And so we don't want to advocate against bad business practices, unfair treatment of employees. We don't want to advocate against bad political practices because of where our revenues come from. So I thought you would have touched on it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a profoundly important consideration. I was looking this morning at the minimum wage in Jamaica. It's about $2 per hour. And I wondered which politician would at this stage be bold enough to say that although it has been recently increased by 100%, at this point in our the state of our economy, it needs to be twice what it is right now. I say that to say that, can you imagine you as a pastor preaching to how unjust the minimum wage is when some of your members employ many minimum wage earners. So then becomes it then comes to the question of how courageous you're going to be to call the issue regardless of the consequences. It also becomes a question of might I say, the conviction by which your members are governed. And in this case, to your question, your well-endowed members, the conviction which drives them to contribute to the ministries of the church in the way they do. And whether that conviction is so frail that a call for justice and fair wages and fair business practices would offend. And I would suggest that if it brings offense, then let it be. But if you're going to decide that you can't offend the guy who owns who owns Peter's bakery, or the one who owns Kenwood Construction, you can't offend them, and therefore you're going to keep yourself silent on the injustices you see, then you would have been bought, to use the metaphor in Daniel. You would have submitted yourself to being defined by those who contribute to your ministry. And that would be a danger. That would be my initial answer, at least.
Okay, thank you very much for your responses. Do we have another question? Okay. Yes, Dr. Maureen, and then we have Dr. Hazel. And we have somebody online. Let's hear from Dr. Maureen, and then the person online, and then Dr. Hazel.
Mine is not really a question, it's just a comment to say that I'm satisfied, because this morning, one of the things that Professor Thompson said is that the model of churchhood that we have is no longer viable. And that is one of the things which, if I were not coming back, I was coming back anyway, but that's one of the things I wanted to hear. And he did deliver, because, he reminded us, for example, this morning that the church does not exist for itself, it exists for the world. And then in this afternoon's presentation, when we listen carefully to some of the things he pointed out, that it is there's no alternative. Reminded us that as church, there ought to be alternative, and the emphasis on the openness, the transparency that he alluded to when he spoke about whether you're not a member, you can't ask questions and so on. These are some of the things that we have to mull over in our minds as to how exactly are we doing the work of the church. So thank you very much, Professor. Just wanted to express my thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Murray. If I might just do a quick response to say, so non-members are welcome to attend our fundraising events. If we're having, as in our church, for example, if we're having the Love Feast, and everybody is welcome to attend and participate. And we're always looking for people to give to the work of ministry. And I'm saying, it boggles my mind that you tell them to leave when you're going to do the business of church. Or if they say they better sit back and you don't have a place to ask a question. It is frightening. It is what we call in politics taxation without representation. You give but you don't have a right to speak. And that has to change. That has to change. I mean, I'm suggesting that that's an area we need to examine to change.
From line. Thank you very much. Okay, Dr. Hazel, while Sister Monique access that question, probably could have yours.
Thanks again, Professor Thompson, for that, again, stern presentation. Issue of alternative thinking and its application to how the church functions, and particularly the example that you offer of a number of churches that might be in the same location, collaborating in some way. And I mean, I think that it is a serious model that we should consider. And my question is, what role can an institution like UTC play in laying the groundwork for that? Because I think the way we function at UTC now maintains some of the denominational pride and not so much divisiveness as deference. What might be some of the alternative thinking that might be offered to an institution like us, where we do have an opportunity, I think, because of the interdenominational nature of the institution and the students that come here, to provide a groundwork that prepares them to be able to work together in more profound ways than they currently.
That's an excellent question. That's a very insightful question. As for three things, I believe that one of the roles UTC can play is being the broker of that move towards collaboration. Not only because you are already a space where you have the interdenominational relationships and operations, but because you have a faculty of persons who are academics in their own right, practitioners in the field, and who presumably have the time to do the heavy lifting around the thinking about how various models could be explored. You have the time and space to prepare the concept notes and position papers and to present that to the churches for consideration. And you're doing so with the authority, not so much power of authority, but the experiential authority, that you are seeing how these people from different denominations are engaging together. You also have the leadership, you have the opportunity to lead from the space that, if you remember the history, we have St. Peter, St. Holmes, is it? And Canewood. We have these constituent colleges, these antecedent colleges coming together to form the United College. So I believe that there's a lot of history in that you could build. The second thing I want to say is that, as I think through your question, and I think going down any one of those streets and seeing those street churches, or whatever number, none of which is full in most cases, and each of which could hold the membership of all three. Think of how wasteful that is of the gifts that God has given to us, where we have 100 people, maybe, if you're lucky, 80, in a building that can house 300. And we are doing that year after year. Turn one, keep one as a sanctuary, and turn the other two into some form of economic activity to address the poverty that we're giving outreach to. Right? The third thing I would say is that there's a sense in which there's a wait and see game. Let me tell you what I think it is. So, my Moravian sisters and brothers will remember that the Moravian Church was supposedly part of this United Church. Yes. But we backed out because there was a dispute over how the role of bishop, the office of bishop would be treated. So here's what I'm saying now. Leadership is a behavior, not an office. And that is part of our challenge, that each church is looking at how they are going to ensure that their tastes and preferences, their history and their polity become prominent in the arrangement. We have to be courageous enough to abandon all that.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. Do we have the online question now?
Not hearing.
Professor Thompson, I've been taking copious notes as I go along and touch on a few of my pet peeves that I want to just comment on. I want to start with one of the sacraments. Yes, I want to start with one of the sacraments because in our Methodists and in our prayer book we have a preface to our sacrament that every time I hear it I cringe. If you're offering your gift on the altar and no member of the brother or sister has a grievance against you. And I've always said to my husband that Jesus Christ who instituted the sacrament had no preconditions. So my thing is there should be no preconditions to the sacrament. And that's a whole other story as to whether children can take it and who can take it. But then I'm a law-abiding person, so I follow what the Methodist Church practices or teaches. But my personal view is that precondition is an illegal one. Alright? So that's on the sacrament. You spoke about the sense of place, diverse and inclusive ministry. And I can say for a fact, and I'm speaking from my own experience of what I see happening in our church. In fact, I find our church to be extremely exasperating. Why I say that? Too many of our members are just simply left on the fringes. So what you're saying in terms of a sense of place, people need to feel involved. You come to church every Sunday. You might not be able to read the scripture, but you might be able to serve as an usher. And my philosophy is involve everyone in doing something. Now, our church is operate like lodges. Too many of our members are just simply alienated. And because of that, there is no real sense of ownership to the church. You go, but really, if you don't go, nobody will get in this sort of thing. Diverse and inclusive ministry. Now, for women's day of prayer this week, I said to the women about the need to be tolerant because people are different. We are gifted differently. God made us that way, so we don't have a choice. Now, within our church, we tend to have a way of trying to force everybody into the same mold. But people have different interests, and our ministries really need to cater to the interests, to the issues that people face. So I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. Now, I divert a little bit with your perception on the failings of the church. I do not share with you that coming together is enough for survival. And UTC is proving your theory wrong because UTC has come together. It is a coming together of several colleges. But is it really, where is it at right now? My view on the failings of our church has to do with our churches not practicing proper stewardship. And use my Methodist church as an example. We complain about money, but our church is vested in a lot of lands that we do absolutely nothing about. Now, if I go, and I've actually done it, but if I go and say, you know something, approach what you're doing differently, because my feelings are in business. That's my feeling, but I cannot use my skills. I'm very passionate about it. I cannot use my skills and training in my church. But because I'm married to a minister, some people think that I should not be stepping in the ministry. So I feel people, then we will have a problem with it. So, Professor, I was very energized with your presentation. I value it greatly, and I just want to thank you. So that's just my 2 cent bit to this discussion. And as you can see, I'm very passionate about it because I believe in capacity. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with many of the things you have said. And I believe that the question of the churches coming together as a strategy for strengthening ministry is not a strategy in and of itself and by itself. Among other things, it is designed to achieve a more frugal use of said resources. So the buildings represent part of the assets of the church. And by deploying those buildings more creatively, you can create space for undertaking some of the empowerment activities that you want to do in providing opportunities for economic upliftment, which really is to be understood as improved quality of life for people. I also would suggest that, I would agree with you that we spend too much time inside the church. There needs to be far more external involvement and outreach is to be understood not merely as passing by the infirmary or the home of the sick or the person who is not attending church and leaving a package. Outreach needs to be understood as a process by which we create sustainable, improved living and well-being opportunities for people, which include the utilization of our assets as well as the active engagement in shaping policy, which is creating some of the poverty we see. Final thing I'll say very quickly is that the underutilization of our skills is one of our greatest sins as a church. The church has not merely butlers, bakers, and what's the other B? Anna? But the church has people who are accountants or business managers, who are farmers, all kinds of skills. The church has to find a way of utilizing those gifts in ways that will make people feel, to come back to your word, a sense of value and a sense of place. And I think that is, so for me, that the minister is a kind of general manager. Not merely a pastor who preaches, but a general manager who sees the church as a large enterprise involved in care of souls and so many other things, and then deploys the resources to achieve those many other objectives.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Thompson. And I know the mic was extended to the person online by Sister Monique and not by me. So I think I take it back. But I think there was a question. There's someone online again.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Kenwood, for the presentation.
Brother Jeremy.
As you talk about the whole idea of alternative thinking, I think in some regard I witnessed this idea of alternative thinking in the context of the World Council of Churches gathering together. So they call it consensus decision-making model. So it is not, so we're in this room discussing a matter, and the leader of the plenary would ask that persons raise a card, red, blue, 3 different colors. So you're either accepting it as it is, you're rejecting it completely, or you are sharing an alternative view to what is being expressed. And as I thought about, the whole idea you shared this evening, I remember when I came back in 2006, I brought it as a proposal to our synod. Never got anywhere really, but I think it's a moment to reconsider how, even as the church gathers at its highest decision-making body, would consider a model that not only says we're voting to decide on this, but bear in mind other views that may exist. The second thing I want to say is that as you talk about alternatives, thinking and so on, would you say that there needs to be some, for want of a better word, substance in the alternatives thinking, so that it's not just an airing a different view, but that it is grounded in something, that there is a sense of perhaps critical thinking that is evident in the different views that are being shared. And finally, you shared your own experience. And I thought to myself that when you're going to talk about alternatives thinking or the other two matters you raised this evening, sometimes if you're a loner, you're going to buck up into a lot of things, a lot of challenges, a lot of oppositions. And I wondered to myself, what are those strategies you would propose to enable us to create a culture that engenders these qualities you articulated this evening? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brother Jermaine. Three important and in some cases difficult issues there. All right, so let me start with the one in the middle. Yes, the notion of alternative thinking is not merely that of saying, I see it differently, without articulating what that difference is and showing how that other idea can be put to work. Indeed, the bedrock of alternative thinking is that you're articulating an approach, a solution, a strategy which can get the organization to the same destination or yet a better destination. So there has to be that critical substantive element. Now we come to the third. The question of how do we, if I might put an interpretation to your question or rephrase it, how do we create coalitions? How do we create these common agenda, our sense of collective framing of the issue that would allow for a shared action towards a destination? And I think the incipient point you're making is that one man, one woman is not able to successfully change the direction of an organization. You have to be able to build a coalition, to build a community of persons who share a common cause, and to create the motivation for people to pursue over the long haul. And there are three ways I suggest that, there are three steps probably for creating that. The first is being able to articulate the danger that the community faces, and in the same space to point to or highlight a destination to which you can go. So it is to create that contract, what Obama was attributed or was said to have said, to create this urgency of the now, to make people see that the current reality cannot be accepted and that we have to find a new destination. And that you do through continuous conversation, that you do through awareness raising. I was making the point earlier this morning that one of the ways in which we get our churches, our members, to become part of the activism and the advocacy is in those awareness creating sessions. So we're not just studying the Bible for the purposes of understanding its history and the internal message of the passage, but studying the Bible to understand its practical application to the world in which we operate. We are studying the Bible to understand how we might ground our actions in the teaching of the scriptures to address the social ills. So the first is that awareness raising. The awareness raising about the dangers and awareness raising about the destination. The second is by the assigning of responsibilities, that people are given roles to play, duties to do, tasks to pursue, and they are doing so, they are assigned these roles based on their skills, based on their interests. To go back to my Methodist prayer, there are many tasks to be done. Some are easy, some are difficult. Some are aligned with your temporal interests and capacities. To assign responsibilities and duties. And the third is to create that culture of mutual accountability where I can't just decide that I'm not going to be doing it and I don't have a valid explanation, justification, that I owe a duty not to some individual who is my master, for there's only one master, Christ, but I owe a duty to the community to which I have given myself as a brother or sister and servant. So it is great that consciousness that we're answerable. I think part of the challenge with how we lead organizations and communities is that we seek to create loyalties between individuals and the leader, rather than loyalties among the community of members collectively. Your first point, if I go quickly, you speak to the model of what I interpret that model to represent is that the process of decision making or the process of deliberation recognizes at the outset that there is a place for dissent. There's a place for people to have another view. But to come to your middle point, that the view must be grounded in something. And yes, we need to structure our deliberations differently. You come and present a report and a question, all in favor of accepting aye. Those against, and there's no debate as to what is presented in many cases. That was a long question and a long answer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor. We had a question online or a comment.
Is UTC incorporated any or all of this activities?
Okay.
Is UTC what?
Incorporating any or all of these concepts.
All right. Well, UTC has to answer that.
Dr. Thomas?
What was the question?
Is UTC incorporating any or all of these concepts?
Who's that done? We will be considering, taking those into consideration in our.
We may not hear you, Dr. Thomas.
I said in part. In part.
That's a Korean word?
was that?
Is that a courageous word?
No, I'm sure that normally the lecturers from this day, we do discuss them afterwards, and I'm sure that there is need for us to take action. We'll do our best to ensure that will happen. So it will be followed up, and we will take it from there.
Okay.
If I might.
Yes.
Sorry. I want to go back to Dr. Hazel's question. And sorry, what I said. If, one of the things I sometimes worry about that's from word, honor. You preach a sermon, and, they tell you it's a good sermon, and then nothing happens after that. And I'm glad to hear, Dr. Thomas, that there is a process by which the college contemplates some of the things that come out of the lectures, and certainly that's a good model. But if I might declare an interest or express an interest, there are at least 3 things that I would be happy as a person and as a member of your community today to see. I would want to see UTC deliberating and developing a proposal for greater collaboration among churches to strengthen the direction of ministry. I believe it is an abominable waste to have these buildings that are larger than you need, and you're actually basically competing side by side for the members. So a model that expands the United model is something that it would be wonderful to see. The second thing that I would like to see happen coming out of this conversation is that every person who is part of this community decide to get enumerated and to vote for the party of their choice, to participate in selecting those who lead policy. And the third thing I would like to see and hope will happen is that in our individual churches and the collective church movement that will arise, that will identify those key issues of injustice about which we spoke this morning, and that the church, the churches connected with the United Theological College or the Jamaica Council of Churches as a group will be issuing a statement on the crisis, the genocide in Gaza, and will collaborate with your churches, your sister churches in North America, right? And will find some way of making your voices heard in the corridors in Washington. Remember, there's always a pastor who is a pastor to the President of the United States, right? For years it was Billy Graham, who in his later years said that one of his regrets was that he never touched the issue of injustice in the society. He's always preaching, but has never spoken about injustice, which he saw when he had a direct line to the President. I'm hoping that you as church leaders will build alliances with your colleagues in North America and make your voices heard in the corridors. The final thing I would say is that on this issue of educational injustice and corruption and mistrust, that you will be marching in large numbers, seeking meetings with the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister and their cabinet to let it be known that you as church leaders are completely unhappy with the state of injustice in this country when it comes to corruption and when it comes to educational disopportunity. If those are 3 things that come out, I think you would become, you would have made a mark bigger than the mark you're making.
Thank you very much, Professor. Sounds something like closing remarks, but we haven't gotten there yet because we have 2 questions.
Yes, thank you very much for the lecture this morning and this evening. I wondered if you're not on the board of UTC, that perhaps you ought to be on the board of management for UTC. As I listened to Reverend Young, and you talked about the whole matter of having the courage to challenge our members about the minimum wage, what would you say? I spoke to someone about that, but of the minimum wage, raising the minimum wage. And the person said to me, this person is a member of the congregation and earning a very good salary. But the person said, listen, if you raise the minimum wage to so and so, then I have to get a raise in order to be able to pay the increase in the minimum wage. Now, how would you respond to that person? Because I remember this morning you spoke about equity and equality and the matter of behavior and so on. So how would you respond to that church member? Because I know that is exactly what some persons are thinking. If the minimum wage is increased, how will we pay? And will we have to get one? And then I don't think the status quo will be much changed if that's going to be the case. How would you respond to that person?
Yeah, it is in fact a complex situation. So the largest employer of minimum wage earners, well, there are three large employers of minimum wage earners: the government, the hotel industry, and the private security industry. All right? And then you have a fourth, which would be the business establishments, the supermarkets and those people. So let's take the supermarket as an example. If the minimum wage is raised, then they will raise the prices of their products. And the same people who are struggling to buy the food now will buy something that's the same. That is one argument that's made. But guess what? The minimum wage is not raised. Well, for years, the minimum wage was at the level it was. And goods were being raised every week just the same. So we have been led to this narrative that if you seek to improve the wages of the people at the lowest end, it's going to hurt the society. Have you noticed how whenever there is talk about making provision for some social services, the first argument of government is that it will affect the economic gains we have made. Whenever the poor are to get something, it will affect the economic gains. But when the rich get it, it's good for the society. Just listen to that kind of argument. And part of the work of the church will have to be to challenge that argument on the face of it. But secondly, to get the analysts, the economists, and the other experts to show that this does not have to be the case. I'll point you a model. In Finland, a lot of people reference Finland for their educational success. But did you know that Finland does not practice the Western neoliberal economic policies that they tell us is best for us? Finland operates what they call the policy of social corporatism. The government is the chief broker in negotiations between labor and capital in Finland. And government seeks to ensure that capital operates in a way that promotes their interests, but also promotes the interests of labor. Finland has been voted, or Finnish citizens, there's what they call the Global Happiness Index. Finland, for 6 years in a row, is the happiest country on earth. It's a country with tremendous wealth, but the gap between the top and the bottom is very narrow. Unlike places like Jamaica and America, where the gap is wide, because government doesn't feel it has the duty to protect the poor, to advance the interests of the poor, whilst enabling the rich to make their profits. So what we need in Jamaica, I suggest, is a government mentality and a government policy that says the rich cannot just willy-nilly be raising prices in the way they're doing. We had the price control regime back in the 70s and they claimed that it mashed up the economy, right? But the countries of Europe, Denmark, Belgium, and all those countries, capital does not willy-nilly raise prices. They take account of the good of the society. We need that kind of economic arrangement in Jamaica, in the Caribbean.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. There's another question at the back over there. No? Okay, so we have interrogated the topic this evening, looking at the various crises that presently face the church. If I were part of the audience, I would have asked a question to the extent that has to do with relevance. Because we talk about the relevance of the church. Does that in any way impute about the irrelevance of God? And among our omnis, what about God being omnirelevant? Thought for food for thought. And then the whole question in terms of the crises. To me, one of the crises that we face as a church is the crisis of the new morality. We did not talk about that tonight, and maybe that is for another lecture. But that is something that we also need to bear in mind. Would it fall on the reach in terms of those who we seek to reach, even though people are not like us, believe and practice the same thing we do, and the way that we reach them? I don't know, Professor, it's meant to be provocative, but you may respond.
Okay. Thank you. So, I hold the view that the church is one instrument of God's work in the world. I'm of the view that God can use people to do His will and accomplish His designs who are not necessarily members of the church. And so then, the question of relevance is not, the question of the church's relevance does not rise to the level of God's relevance. One of there are various New Age movements through which people seek to experience spirituality and closeness to God without being part of the church. And I believe that there is a legitimate case to be made that you can be close to God without being involved in the church. In fact, one of the dangers we have courted for a long time is the view that you can only find God in the church. I don't believe that. I may be wrong, but I don't believe that. So I believe that God reaches people everywhere, in and outside the church. One of the things that I believe both theologically and psychologically is that human beings have an inherent need to belong. We were made in community, we were made for community, and we cannot really survive outside of community. I think where the church has faced its difficulties is that it has not sufficiently adopted its mechanisms and methods to understand the diverse needs of its members. I remember when I was, many years ago, when I was at Salem, Germany, brother Germany, I sought to start a singles ministry, right? For these young sisters
who felt that the conversations of the congregation were not sufficiently relevant to what they want to talk about. At the church I worship at Lefadra in Newport, with some resistance, they want to start a widow's ministry, and I said, maybe that's not the right name. You know what I call that? Because not everybody wants to be known as a widow. And some people are widows, so they have no intention of remaining a widow if they have a chance. But what it suggests is that there are some peculiar needs that members have, and the ministry of the church needs to be directed, deployed in ways that are responsive to those needs. And unless the church is finding a way of doing it, and the pastor must not be required to lead everything. Remember, the pastor is a general manager, all right, a choir director, orchestra director, who has his or her specialist role, but is calling on an orchestra of people, all right? So the church can become relevant. And in the church does, people go outside the church to find God. I'm not using my father's expression. You have another point?
Yes. I was asking about the numerality.
The numerality.
Yeah. And
yeah,
I think that is great.
Yeah, I think I'll say two things. One is that we face a social reality that the standards of morality are becoming, or have become, increasingly broad and less stringent. But if you read some of the literature from the 1800s, indeed, if you go back as far as the time of Paul, the apostle, he was concerned that morality was becoming lax. So it's a perennial question of every generation, of people being insufficiently conscious about the need to walk circumspectly and to observe certain rules and standards and practices. I believe part of the way in which is my second responsibility, part of the way the church is will have to engage with that is to try to understand the places from which people are coming in relation to the kinds of behaviors with which they are finding greater comfort. You know, I'll give you a kind of almost a juvenile example. When I was growing up, I was told that a woman who wore an anklet was a whore. Yes. Good? No. How, try that now, all right? So I say that to say that some, not all, some of the issues we describe as raising moral challenges are simply things that reflect people's liberated consciences. And we have to be, we have to examine the place on which people are coming. When I was growing up as well, a tattoo was an evidence of Satan. Right? I have a niece who has about, how much you have, Johnny? She has about 6, right? And she gives a little to every one of them, right? And I thought that they were, one of them was when 2 friends of hers died. That is her memory of her 2 friends who died from sickle cell disease. So the idea that if you wear a tattoo, you are an ungodly person. I don't know that we can really plausibly argue that. But it doesn't mean that there are not issues of questionable moral judgment that the church has to
explore. The final thing I would say, though, and those of you who study ethics and philosophy might be able to help me talk through this. I believe it's a flawed premise to construe morality as being narrowly a difference between some notion of right and wrong. I argue that morality that is largely, or more importantly, a question of finding a better way to do the thing. Because in some of the decisions of leadership that we have to make, the choice is not between some right and wrong thing. The choice is between one right thing and another right thing. And indeed finding even a better way of doing the thing, which is a third right way. So when, for example, to go back to the point I made earlier, when denominations decide that if you're not a member, you can bury it in a regular cemetery. You are making a judgment about the quality of life and the person's soul. Certainly, at least there remains. You're saying that this person's remain do not meet the standard for being in the place reserved for some. And I suggest that that is a highly immoral decision. So the question becomes, how do we make decisions that reflect our best judgment of the will and mind of God? I'll give another example. Churches from time to time must make tough decisions about the limited resources they have. Money is not plentiful, and you have to use those resources as frugally as you might. Reverend Curlew, you're former head of the Baptist Church, right? And you had to make some tough decisions. Many of the decisions you made, Dr. Thomas, were not decisions between what something right and something wrong. Is the best way to deal with a difficulty. And I'm saying that the question of a higher form of morality invites a conversation of what is the most appropriate, sustainable decision to make in the best interest of everybody. That, I suggest, is one of the battlefields on which morality is fought.
Okay, you're saying that three things can be right at the same time.
Three things can be right at the same time.
Okay. Thank you very much. And so, any final questions? Yes, Reverend Curlew, and I see another hand at the back. Mike?
Thank you so much. I was unable to hear the lectures this morning and this evening, but I feel compelled, as you were speaking just now and responding to the whole issue of morality, to just raise this. With all that you have said, though, I think that I have been observing that where it concerns the church making a response in light of how you have just shared that, it takes a whole lot of courage to do that. And I say that because the church generally is not a courageous church. It's not the church of the New Testament. We don't have some of those marks of the church in the New Testament that we read about. And not courageous, saying not courageous, this is what I mean. That we are often very, I use the word loosely, cagey in responding to some of the issues eventually in terms of funerals and who gets buried where and so on, and where these services of Thanksgiving are held, for example, and other things like that. We're always very cagey because we don't want to ruffle the feathers. So there is that lack of courage, but there is also the unwillingness, I believe, to articulate a response, a theological response, for the sake of the membership, for the sake of the congregations, so that they can at least try to understand. Now we're here at this institution, United Theological College of the West Indies. We do a number of things in terms of our courses, in terms of our ministerial students, their program of formation for the Baptist, we call it student pastorates, and so on. Now, because of how the world is, because of the crises or particular crises in the world, we are still finding, though, that it is difficult to relate to the crises when there is this inability to articulate. So even if we're here, learning and being trained and trying to understand theologically, doctrinally, whatever that might be, ethically, morally, whatever that might be, there is still this difficulty in being courageous and articulating that courage to the people, society, community, nations, to the world. I thought I'd raise that.
Thank you. If I might respond, that is your courage. Some weeks ago, I don't remember what the topic of my sermon was, but I was talking about, yes, it was the theme of our church this year, the Moravian Church. How many times have I called Moravian Church in this conversation? It's about something to the, Brother Barry might be able to tell me correctly. Surviving in a digital Babylon, or worse, that effect. And I do not believe that social media, and there's a piece that was done at our youth rally. Whoa, this is a whoa, it's a Babylon. Twitter, Instagram, all these things are Babylon. I disagree with that fundamentally. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love, of a sound mind. We have the capacity to think. Anything can become a Babylon. All right? And social media is no greater Babylon than your car, if you worship the car, or your house, or any other thing. But I was making this point, that we have choices, that it is our capacity to choose that determines our condition and our destination, our capacity to choose. And people with money may have choices that other people don't have, because a who is in a dependent relationship, for example, that is abusive, may not be able to make the choice to leave because she doesn't have the money. We are able to choose when we have education. You decide based on your critical thinking capacity that you ain't gonna believe that. But I want to argue that the most important capacity we possess is our capacity, when we have it, of courage. If you're courageous, the fear that young miss has about her ability to survive without the man, that fear is driven away. She's going to take the plunge anyway because of that courage she exercises. And unlike education and money, which are resources that are scarce in some cases, there's no limit on courage. You can be as bold as you choose to. So to come to the heart of the question, I am of the view that the church in the current generation is a shadow of its former self. In the 70s when I was a boy, young man, there were, pardon? There were leaders such as Ernie Gordon, Edmund Davis, Ashley Smith. These guys spoke with a fearlessness
I remember there was in 1986, Edmund Davis was at the time, I think, the General Secretary of the Conference of Churches, the JCC. There was an issue having to do with the behavior of the then Prime Minister. And he spoke specifically criticizing the conduct of the Prime Minister. The next morning when they went to work, there was a lot of garbage on the premises of JCC. And nobody knew how the garbage reached there. But that did not shut them up. That did not shut the church from speaking authoritatively to the issues. We in our generation are too cagey. We're cowards. And to come back to my point about reach and relevance, because people don't hear us talking about things that matter. That if the church began to speak about the garbage not being collected, the pay not being made on time, or the condition of work in which the condition in which people work, unless the church is doing that, it's not speaking to the realities of people. I said this last one. Some of you might know my politics. And I have criticized the PNP, of which I'm a member, and I criticize the government heavily. And I have a piece of work I'm going to be doing. And one of the things I'm going to be saying is that part of the explanation for the 30% turnout is that we not talk the language of the people. People not see you as relevant. You are uno is outside the world of the people. Bible has said uno are. So unless the church is speaking to the issues that people are experiencing, if your sermon, I just don't understand, by the way. Again, I'm going to offend some people. I think I had it in my notes. I don't understand this preoccupation with heaven. This preoccupation with heaven. Why be concerned about heaven? Heaven will take care of itself. Sufficient unto the day. Talk about the realities of earth. Heaven will fall into place in the way God will choose. Depending on what you believe about heaven. So let's talk about the realities that people face on a day-to-day basis. You know, Sam Vassell, some years ago, preached a powerful sermon. He spoke about the eschatological ethic. And he made a point that it is your ethics here and now that defines the quality of your eschatology. A preacher who was quite blood, he said, to heaven, heaven. They're going to serve God on earth. Let God take care of heaven. So, this, to come back to the point. So, what I was actually saying is that some of our sermons are just far too heavily. They don't connect with the reality of earth and the issues that people are facing. And people can come and sit down and listen to some of those things. It's not touching them. And that's the last thing. Frightening people into repentance is a bad strategy. Look how much people doctor tells them smoking will kill them. I'm not sorry. Or bad driving. People are not frightened by disastrous consequences. They feel that they have a chance of avoiding those consequences. So I want to tell them something to burn ahead. That is old theology.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think we have a final question. Yes.
Thank you very much. Professor Thompson, Thank you for this lecture this evening. It is indeed thought-provoking, and I really appreciate it. But on the matter of morality, you made the point that morality as it ought to be is you have a first, a second, and a third. But we are in a context now where we're seeing a kind of morality where it is good versus right. What would you have to say on that?
Thank you, Brother Barry. Just to clarify, firstly, my observation about three things being right was not to say that every situation is characterized that way. What I was arguing is that in the context of the decisions that a leader is often called to make, the choices are not always between something that is opposite to the other. Let me give an example. You have a staff member who is persistently late. Maybe that's quite applicable in church where people don't sign it. Right? Or you have a church member who, let's put it this way, who frequently doesn't attend meetings of the particular committee to which he or she is assigned. There are probably 5 ways of dealing with that person's failure to attend. You could ask a member to whom he or she is close to inquire what is happening. That's fine. You could take a decision to remove him or her from the committee. That's lawful. You could yourself reach out to the person. That's also acceptable. You could decide to assign that person to some other responsibility. Or a 5th thing, you could raise him out publicly and embarrass him or her. All of those things are legitimate. Raising it public is fine. The person has, so I'm saying the question then of what is the right thing to do is not located in which it doesn't raise a question of is there a wrong thing to do. The question of morality in those circumstances is a question of what is the most ideal, most appropriate, most helpful, most uplifting approach to take things through. Right? Because morality, as Paul Lehman, remember Paul Lehman, the Catholic scholar, he says, morality begins with the question of not what ought I to do, but who am I? So which of these behaviors, which of these decisions best reflects who I am as a person who seeks to be governed by the will of God as I understand it. So what I'm saying is that morality is a complex issue. But, and I don't believe that there are easy choices of what I say between night and day. So let's take where one of the issues raised this morning is of Gaza and Israel's genocide. It is
easy in those circumstances to make a distinction between what is legitimate self-defense, which is what Israel claims, and continuous bombardment where your actions are not hitting the target. Hamas leaders are not being killed. I mean, it's amazing how in that small space they're able to hide. It is women and children. So the question of what is morally right in those circumstances becomes less complex. And there are issues in our society which are also perhaps easily defined. Where you use the church's resources for purposes other than they are intended, it becomes a moral question as to whether that is acceptable. Where you use a donation from a brother or sister, contrary to the expressed wish of the donor, because you feel that there's a more important need that you must satisfy, that becomes a moral question. Where you assign a pastor whose skills are not most ideal for those circumstances become a moral question. Though you could argue that by throwing him or her in that difficult situation, you create an opportunity for those skills to be developed. So I'm just saying the choices we make are complex in most cases.
Okay, thank you very much. And so, Professor Thompson, you helped us to interrogate the theme, the church and its engagement of the world in crisis, strategies and duties. We have identified a number of crises, 6 of them you have elaborated on, and you have shared with us a number of strategies, as well as reminded us of our various duties. And just that we will not be daunted by the task, but that we will indeed seek to serve the present age, or calling to fulfill. We have 2 other items on the agenda. It was Richard Bonhoeffer who said that it's not the ultimate thing that is the most important thing, but the penultimate thing, the thing that comes before the ultimate. And so I'm going to invite one of our students at this time to do the penultimate thing of appreciation. Sister Foyer, we will invite her at this time, Cromwell, to express appreciation.
First of all, we want to thank God that you have come today to share with us. Indeed, your message is quite enlightening. We would have learned that we are imperfect beings in an imperfect world. Therefore, we have no excuse not to be courageous. We would have learned that we need not to put a plaster on every sore, but rather seek to challenge the systems that are responsible for the various inequities in our society. And we would have also learned that our teacher, our lecturer this evening, his new book is coming out on leadership, and he would have shared some of the elements in that book, encouraging us once again to look at alternatives, that alternatives require courage, and that we are to be accountable. So thank you very much, and we know from this evening that we have indeed been changed intellectually, and it is my hope that we will all put into practice what you have said. So thank you so much.
Just to thank you for the privilege
of being part of this conversation today. I truly enjoyed the interactions, and I trust that there will be some products coming out of our ponderings, and I look forward to hearing of your activism across the Caribbean as true prophets and as people of courage who believe that there's a cause that you can successfully pursue. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Before we put on the benediction, I'm going to invite Dr. Hazel to say something to us about the colloquium tomorrow. Dr. Hazel.
Thank you, Dr. Josiah. Just to note that tomorrow, in some ways, our special week continues as we observe the second staging of the Clement Gale colloquium, and to say that this year we are operating under the theme, "Thus saith the Lord, daring to speak for God." Maybe some of the issues of courage might very well apply to this focus tomorrow. The colloquium is going to begin at 9 o'clock, go until 1 o'clock, and we'll end with lunch together. Hope you can join us for that. And we're taking the form of a panel discussion this year. And the panel consists of Cicely Antil Horsford, who's a Moravian. Cicely, thank you very much. Cicely Antil Horsford. I got that part right? A Moravian minister who is present in Barbados. Reverend Stephen Jennings, Baptist minister, Reverend Dr. Stephen Jennings, and an adjunct lecturer here at UTC. Reverend Dr. Michael Jagazar, a retired Lutheran minister, and Reverend Dr. Michael Friday, a Baptist minister, who will join us. Three of these panelists will join us virtually, and Reverend Stephen Jennings will be here in person. We hope you can join us as we continue to interrogate how we respond to some of the challenges in our nation as church, and particularly in relation to how we shape and fashion our preachers of today. So I hope I'll see all of you and more tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hazel. I mean, there's been a very engaging day, a very engaging evening, but all things do must come to an end. And so let us stand for the benediction. Go with us, Lord, from hence. We only ask that you be sharer in our various tasks and duties. And may the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit rest, remain, and abide with God, now and forevermore. Amen. Have a good night. God bless you.